Rock Hudson dead, his year-long battle with AIDS at an end.
Has died at a Pasadena, California hospital. He was 59.
There was a time when people living with AIDS became a haunting terror that made the entire world recoil in fear. On the public stage, they were dazzling stars shining brilliantly. Yet, behind that glittering facade, they were merely human beings trapped in constant anxiety, forced to conceal their illness and race against death day by day. Some were cinematic legends who once hosted wild gay parties on an enormous scale. Some with venomous tongues ceaselessly cursed the LGBTQ+ community only for fate in its cruel irony to bring them down through AIDS. And more horrifying still, there were those who chose to end their lives right under the stage lights in front of the eyes of millions of spectators. Within that list of 20 names were icons of the era: actors, singers, politicians, and even legends of the Broadway stage. Their passing left the world in deep mourning, and yet the sorrow was made all the more unbearable because their deaths were bound to a disease that humanity once regarded with coldness and without forgiveness. 1. Rock Hudson. The death that changed America's perception of AIDS. Rock Hudson, a name that instantly evokes the image of a true silver screen heartthrob. In the 1950s, he was the ultimate symbol of masculinity adored across the United States. Yet few knew that the seemingly glamorous life he lived was in reality nothing more than a perfectly staged performance. With his strikingly handsome looks, Hudson quickly rose to the ranks of an A-list star. But behind the bright lights of the film set, he lived in constant, paralyzing fear the truth that he was gay. In an era when even a single rumor could destroy an entire career, Hudson was forced to conceal his true self. He existed in two opposing worlds on screen. He was the devoted lover who made women swoon while behind the gates of his Beverly Hills mansion. He was simply himself hosting secret debauched parties on a scale so sensational that the press never dared approach. The mansion at 9402 Beverly Crest Drive was the setting for these all-night parties where drugs, narcotics, and the sounds of moans echoed through rooms bathed in dim red light. Rumor had it that every guest was bound to absolute silence and not a single paparazzo dared intrude. For those who grew too curious, often disappeared under mysterious circumstances. As whispers began to spread, Hudson's agent Henry Wilson arranged a sham marriage in 1955 with his secretary Phyllis Gates to quell public suspicion. The true tragedy struck in 1984 when Hudson was diagnosed with AIDS, a disease at the time regarded as a death sentence for homosexuals. By July 1985, when his body had grown so frail and gaunt that it could no longer be hidden, the truth finally began to surface. On July 25, 1985, his agent officially confirmed the shocking news: Rock Hudson had AIDS. His death at the age of 59 not only closed the curtain on a life marked by tragedy, but also sent shockwaves across the globe. His passing forced Hollywood to confront its own hypocrisy and became a turning point that completely reshaped how the world viewed AIDS. Yet Hudson was only one of countless examples. Before him, there had been another star who, despite resorting to extreme measures to cure his homosexuality, ultimately could not escape the sentence of the century's deadliest disease. 2. Anthony Perkins, the killer who never lived true to himself. Anthony Perkins is remembered worldwide as the most iconic murderer in film history, Norman Bates in Psycho. Yet few realize that this haunting role nearly mirrored his own life, a man compelled to live under a flawless mask. Born with artistry in his blood, Perkins seemed destined for stardom. With an Academy Award nomination for only his second film, a string of romantic roles that left women enamored, and even a Billboard hit to his name, he quickly ascended to the peak of fame. But off-screen Perkins was gay, a truth he could never openly admit. In the 1950s, he and his partner actor Tab Hunter lived in constant fear. Surviving photographs from the era show their staged double dates, two men sitting together in a movie theater while holding hands with hired girlfriends as if performing a collective charade to disguise their love. His entire life was overshadowed by an obsession with becoming more masculine. He subjected himself to conversion therapy, painful, torturous methods aimed at curing his attraction to men, and even married photographer Barry Berenson to maintain the illusion. But by the late 1980s, tragedy returned. In a cruel twist, Perkins did not learn of his HIV infection from a doctor, but instead through a tabloid. He hid the truth from his family and continued working, forcing a smile even as his body grew visibly thinner and weaker. On September 12, 1992, Anthony Perkins died at the age of 60 from pneumonia related to AIDS. The tragedy did not end there. 9 years later, his wife boarded American Airlines Flight 11, the first plane to crash into the North Tower of the World Trade Center during the horrific 9/11 attacks, her fate sealed in catastrophe. And still, the sorrow did not stop. For just one day after publicly admitting to the world that he had AIDS, another music icon would also fall. 3. Freddie Mercury, the music legend who died in silence. Freddie Mercury, the name synonymous with music legend, a living phenomenon of the world stage. Yet behind the trademark mustache and fiery somersaults on stage, he was a man slowly dying within the grip of AIDS. Born Farrokh Bulsara. Freddie longed to live as his true self, but life forced him into concealment. He appeared publicly alongside Mary Austin, the woman he called the love of my life, though she was in truth his confidant, while privately immersing himself in gay relationships and all-night parties. The pain of those years would ultimately inspire some of his most unforgettable songs. In 1987, Freddie received devastating news. He was HIV positive. Even as the disease ravaged his body day by day, he worked relentlessly. It was during this time that The Show Must Go On was born, not just a song, but a defiant declaration from a man battling destiny itself. On November 23, 1991, after years of secrecy, Freddie finally announced to the world that he had AIDS. A mere 24 hours later, he was gone. Mary Austin inherited the majority of his estate, including the famous Garden Lodge residence. But Freddie's death was not an ending. He transformed it into a final performance, a powerful reminder of the plague of the century. In the wake of his passing, the Mercury Phoenix Trust was established, turning grief into meaningful action and leaving behind an immortal legacy for all humanity. And still, the story did not end there. Another star who spent his life forced to uphold a perfect image would leave behind secrets so painful that only those closest to him could ever understand. 4. Robert Reed, the secret behind the image of the perfect father on screen. For millions of American viewers, Mike Brady and the Brady Bunch was the very definition of the ideal father. But for Robert Reed, the man behind the role, that image was nothing more than a flawless facade hiding a life filled with secrets and a fear that never went away. Born in 1932 under the name John Robert Wrights Jr., Reed began his career on the theater stage before quickly rising to fame as America's dad on screen. Yet even as the nation praised him as the model of the perfect man, Reed was quietly fighting an intense personal battle. After a marriage that lasted 5 years, Reed confessed to his wife that he was in fact gay. On set, he was infamous for his extreme perfectionism, often clashing fiercely with writers whom he accused of delivering scripts that lacked depth. But with the child actors, Reed truly became a father figure, taking them to the theater, encouraging them to expand their horizons, and caring for them with genuine devotion. Still, no one knew that his body was slowly being consumed by illness. In 1991, tragedy struck when he was diagnosed with advanced colon cancer. And then, when his medical records were revealed, an even more devastating truth came to light. Robert Reed was HIV positive. The disease had been silently eroding his health for years, even as he continued to wear a bright smile on camera. On May 12, 1992, Reed died at the age of 59. Although his death certificate listed cancer as the official cause, those closest to him knew that it was HIV/AIDS that had brought his life to an early end. Robert Reed carried his secret to the grave. But not long after, another death unfolded, this time in front of millions of viewers, leaving behind a legacy that shook the nation and countless questions that remain unanswered. 5. Pedro Zamora, the death broadcast live to America. Pedro Zamora was more than just a reality television star. He was the first person to transform his own dying into a lesson for the entire United States by doing the unthinkable, dying before millions of viewers. At the age of 17, Zamora received devastating news. He was HIV positive. It was 1989 when AIDS was still seen as a death sentence, and fear gripped society at every level. He could have remained silent, but instead, Pedro chose a different path to fight openly. He became an HIV warrior, appearing in schools and at medical conferences to confront stigma head-on. He used his own body ravaged by the virus and the trembling yet resolute voice of someone who knew he was counting down the days of his life. In 1994, the Real World San Francisco invited Zamora to join the show. But for him, it was no longer just entertainment. It became a public diary of dying a young man's battle with AIDS broadcast to millions across America. Pedro Zamora brought the story of an immigrant living with HIV and threw it straight into the living rooms of middle-class America. He kissed his boyfriend on television. He got engaged. He spoke candidly about safe sex, about loneliness, about death, and about the raw truth. He gave a human face, a beating heart, and real emotions to the disease America feared most. His engagement ceremony with his boyfriend, Sean Sasser, was a historic moment on television, marking the first time a same-sex commitment ceremony was broadcast nationwide. Yet by then, Zamora's body was failing. His brain attacked by the illness, he lost the ability to walk, to read, and even to remember the names of his friends. And then, on November 11, 1994, only hours after the final episode of The Real World aired, Pedro Zamora died at the age of 22. His entire life, his love, his fight, and his death had been captured on American television from beginning to end. Pedro Zamora's passing before millions opened the door to another story, this time about a man of power whose secrets remained locked away. 6. Ed Koch, the Iron Mayor of New York and the secret no one spoke of. With his trademark greeting, "How am I doing?" Ed Koch became a New York icon for more than a decade. But behind the smile on his campaign posters was a secret that the public would only begin to learn after his death. Born in 1924, Koch served as a soldier before becoming mayor of New York in 1977, at a time when the city was crippled by bankruptcy and crime. He was quickly hailed as the savior who pulled New York back from the brink of collapse. But soon, a new enemy appeared: AIDS. The epidemic spread rapidly, claiming thousands of lives, particularly within the gay community. It was at this moment that Koch's shining image began to crack. Activists, most notably Larry Kramer, fiercely accused him of responding too slowly, even of standing by while gay men died. The weight of these accusations was only intensified by a rumor that had circulated for years that Ed Koch himself was gay. Koch maintained silence, responding only with, "My private life is my private life." For many, that silence spoke volumes, proof of a fear of exposure and a symbol of a generation of politicians who chose to live in the closet in order to preserve power. It wasn't until after his death in 2013 that his close friend Charles Kaiser confirmed Koch was indeed gay. Although he had once signed an executive order banning discrimination against gay people, his role in the fight against AIDS left him condemned by many as having done far too little, far too late. On February 1, 2013, Ed Koch died at the age of 88, carrying to the grave the secrets the city had speculated about for decades. To New York, he was both the hero who revived the city and a controversial figure remembered for his silence during the storm of AIDS. And as Ed Koch took his unspoken secret to the grave, another figure in American politics was left to endure an even harsher and more complicated life. 7. Roy Cohn, the most ruthless player in American politics. Roy Cohn still sends shivers down many people's spines even nearly 4 decades after his death. Born in 1927, Cohn stepped into the world of power at a very young age and quickly became one of the most ruthless figures in American politics. At just 23, he was chosen as an advisor to Senator Joseph McCarthy and played a crucial role in the death sentence of the Rosenbergs. During the infamous Red Scare, Cohn was also deeply involved in the parallel Lavender Scare, a campaign aimed at purging members of the LGBTQ+ community from the government. The bitter irony was that throughout his life, Cohn was surrounded by constant rumors about his own sexuality. His close relationship with his aide David Schein became the subject of media frenzy. Yet Cohn consistently denied the allegations, going so far as to openly ridicule and criticize those he considered weak for choosing to live authentically. After leaving Washington, Cohn did not fade away. Instead, he reinvented himself as a powerful lawyer in the shadows, representing high-profile names such as Donald Trump and several mafia bosses. In 1984, fate turned against him. He was diagnosed with HIV, but he defiantly denied it. To the press, Cohn insisted he had liver cancer. Even as his body wasted away, he clung to the mask of an invincible warrior, never once admitting the truth. On August 2, 1986, Roy Cohn died at the age of 59, leaving behind a cruel paradox. The man who helped persecute homosexuals ultimately died of the very disease associated with that same community. Roy Cohn was not the only case. Another man created a world of his own filled with excess and debauchery, only to be consumed and destroyed by it beyond repair. 8. Steve Rubell, the Dark King of New York, and the collapse from his own light. If there was ever a place in American history where drugs, sex, power, and fame swirled together into a storm of chaotic ecstasy, it was Studio 54, and the man behind that whirlwind was none other than Steve Rubell. Born into a modest family in Brooklyn, few would have guessed that a finance student would soon become an icon of excess and debauchery. After a series of ordinary jobs, Rubel and his friend Ian Schrager transformed an old warehouse into Studio 54, a hedonistic paradise where drugs and decadence ruled. Steve Rubel was the master of that world. He enforced a casting policy at the door. Studio 54 never admitted those he deemed unattractive, but for those he chose, it became a playground of limitless indulgence. Each night was a performance more outrageous than the last. Andy Warhol snorting cocaine in the restroom, Liza Minnelli kissing a stranger on the dance floor, and Mick Jagger wandering naked with sunglasses on. But no party lasts forever. In December 1978, the IRS raided Studio 54 and discovered over $2 million in cash hidden in the ceiling and safes. Rubel was immediately charged with tax evasion, fraud, and money laundering. His once boastful remark, "We made more money than the mafia," became damning evidence used against him in court. Sentenced to 3.5 years in prison, Rubel was forced to relinquish his empire. After his release, he tried to cleanse his past by opening Morgan's Hotel, laying the foundation for the boutique hotel trend. But in 1985, he was handed an invisible sentence, an HIV-positive diagnosis. On July 25, 1989, just 4 years later, Steve Rubel died in a New York hospital. The official cause was listed as hepatitis and septic shock, but everyone knew it was a euphemism used to avoid naming a word still steeped in stigma at the time: AIDS. And the chain of AIDS-related deaths did not stop there. Another star, once dazzling under the spotlight, would soon slip into oblivion under the weight of the same deadly disease. 9. Joel Crothers, the television prince the world forgot. Joel Crothers was once a familiar face on American television. With his good looks and natural acting talent, he became an ideal heartthrob for millions of viewers through hit soap operas such as Dark Shadows and Somerset. But behind the bright lights of the screen, Crothers lived a completely different life. While the public saw him as the embodiment of masculinity among friends and those close to him, he was openly gay. At a time when acknowledging one's sexuality could ruin a career, Crothers was forced to hide his true self from the public. Even his engagement to actress Vala Gray was nothing more than a staged arrangement to protect his public image. By the early 1980s, as the AIDS epidemic began to spread, Joel Crothers suddenly vanished from television. In 1985, a painful truth emerged: he had died at the age of 44 from complications related to AIDS. His death was neither widely reported nor memorialized like that of other stars. Because of the stigma surrounding AIDS at the time, both his career and his true identity were nearly erased from public memory. He passed away in silence, yet his story remains a heartbreaking reminder of the prejudice faced by those in the public eye. But Joel Crothers was not the last. Another star who had only just begun to shine with talent and charisma would soon be swallowed up by death just as quickly. 10. Wade Dominguez, a star who barely shone before being swallowed by darkness. Wade Dominguez may not have been a household name, but anyone who has ever watched Dangerous Minds would find it impossible to forget him. Once seen as one of Hollywood's most promising rising stars, Wade's life and career ended far too soon in an unimaginable tragedy. Born in 1966 with sharp, striking features and a wild, magnetic presence, Wade Dominguez quickly impressed audiences through his roles in City of Industry and The Taxman. People saw in him a young actor full of energy and remarkable talent. But just as his career was reaching its peak, Wade was forced to face a cruel truth: he had been diagnosed with AIDS. In a society still filled with prejudice, Wade chose to remain silent. Behind the radiant smiles on the red carpet was a body growing weaker with each passing day. In his final days, his close friend actress Elizabeth Berkley brought an early cut of his last film, The Taxman, to the hospital so he could watch it. When the credits rolled, Wade broke down in tears, choking out the words, "I acted so well. I acted so well." On August 26, 1998, Wade Dominguez died at just 32 years old due to AIDS-related complications. A promising talent was extinguished too soon, leaving Hollywood with an unhealed wound of sorrow and regret. But Wade Dominguez was not the only star whose life was marked by tragedy. There was another man who never appeared before the camera yet shaped the fashion of an entire generation. 11. Willie Smith, the godfather of streetwear and a death hidden in the shadows. Willie Smith was not simply a fashion designer, he was the man who transformed the way the world looked at fashion itself. For Smith, beautiful clothing did not belong only to the wealthy, it had to be something everyone could wear. Born in Philadelphia in 1948, he grew up surrounded by the vibrant colors of street culture and music, and he carried that energy into his designs. In 1976, he founded his own brand, Willie Wear, built on a simple philosophy to create stylish clothing at prices people could actually afford. Smith fused the dynamism of streetwear with the sophistication of high fashion crafting designs, comfortable enough for casual outings, yet polished enough for the workplace. In doing so, he erased the boundary between luxury and everyday, bringing fashion closer to the masses. But Smith's life came to an abrupt and tragic end. In 1986, his partner passed away from an illness related to AIDS. Only a few months later, Smith himself was hospitalized with the same symptoms. On April 17, 1987, Willie Smith died at the age of 39. At the time, his company concealed the true cause of death to shield him from society's harsh stigma. Still, his legacy endures. He proved that fashion was meant for everyone, and that very belief secured his place as a legend. Yet the story does not stop there. Another man celebrated for his unforgettable supporting roles would also meet a tragic end, carrying secrets with him to the grave. 12. Denholm Elliott, the gentleman of supporting roles and the secrets he took to the grave. Denholm Elliott was the kind of actor whose name you might not immediately recall, but whose face you could never forget. He appeared in more than 125 films, often in supporting roles. Yet he always managed to capture the audience's attention. Born in London in 1922, Elliot survived 3 harrowing years as a prisoner of war. That ordeal forged him into a strong, instinctive man qualities that later became invaluable in his acting career. After the war, Elliot rose to become one of Britain's most beloved character actors. Audiences cherished him as the bumbling Marcus Brody in Indiana Jones, the shrewd Coleman in Trading Places, and the warm-hearted Mr. Emerson in A Room with a View. But behind the accolades and acclaim, Elliot kept a secret: he was bisexual. In 1987, at the very height of his career, he was diagnosed with HIV. At 65, instead of retreating from the spotlight, Elliot chose to keep working, continuing to appear in major film projects, even as the illness steadily consumed his body. On October 6, 1992, at the age of 70, Denholm Elliot passed away at his home due to AIDS-related complications. The news sent shockwaves through the British film industry, not only because it marked the loss of a great talent, but also because it revealed for the first time the illness he had hidden for so long. In his honor, the British Academy of Film and Television Arts established the BAFTA Denholm Elliot Award, given to promising young actors as a way to carry on his legacy. His life resembled the characters he played, at times awkward, at times profound, but always layered with more than what met the eye. And as Denholm Elliot carried his secrets to the grave, another figure, this time from the world of sports, would face an equally tragic death. Tragically, Ondrej Neppela, the death of the great Prince of the Ice. Ondrej Neppela's story did not begin with a passion for sports, but rather with a doctor's recommendation. In 1951, at just 7 years old, young Neppela was taken by his mother to an ice rink as a treatment for his asthma. No one could have imagined that this very step would set him on a path to becoming one of the greatest figure skating legends of the 20th century. It didn't take long for Neppela's natural talent to shine. At the age of 13, he represented Czechoslovakia at the 1964 Winter Olympics. Though he didn't win a medal, the grace and precision in each of his moves heralded the arrival of an ice prince. His career reached its peak at the 1972 Sapporo Olympics, where he captured the gold medal along with 3 world championships and 5 European titles. On the ice, Neppela embodied elegance and absolute discipline. Off the ice, however, he was reserved and reclusive to the point where even those within the sport knew little about his personal life. Nevertheless, quiet rumors about his relationships with male skaters circulated within the figure skating community. After retiring, Neppela continued working as a coach, but in 1988 his health suddenly declined. He was diagnosed with lymphoma, and many within the sport believed the illness was linked to AIDS. On February 6, 1989, Ondrej Neppela passed away in Mannheim, Germany at the age of 38. He departed this world carrying with him not only his glittering gold medals, but also the private secrets that perhaps no one will ever fully know. And as the Prince of the Ice ended his life in silence, other film stars too would soon confront death in quiet solitude. 14. Brad Davis, the glamour and the silent death in secret. Hollywood once fell in love with the roguish smile and fiery eyes of Brad Davis. But behind the face that made millions of hearts tremble lay a dark story so heavy that he himself had to carry it into the grave. Born into an unhappy family, Davis overcame hardship to move to New York and pursue his dream of acting. In 1978, his role as Billy Hayes in Midnight Express turned him into a star overnight and earned him a Golden Globe Award. He went on to make another strong impression with Querelle becoming a gay icon, even though in real life Davis was married with a child. But Brad Davis wasn't just acting on screen, off-screen too. He played the role of a respectable man while hiding his struggles behind drugs and alcohol, which he used to escape the weight of fame and his own inner battles. The true tragedy struck in 1985 when Davis received a diagnosis: AIDS. At that time, AIDS was considered a death sentence burdened with immense stigma. He kept the truth secret, confiding only in a small circle of trusted loved ones. For 6 years, Davis continued to work in films while privately battling the disease as his body wasted away. When he sensed death was near, he made a choice that left Hollywood stunned. On September 8, 1991, at the age of 41, Brad Davis ended his life with medically assisted death, choosing to depart before the illness could strip him of his identity and dignity. It was only after his passing that his wife revealed the truth in a memoir, exposing the reality of a star who once captivated the world, but was forced to live and die in excruciating pain. And when Brad Davis slipped away quietly, another legend, though, basking in the glow of fame, could not conceal the deceptions of his own life. 15. Liberace, glamour, deception, and a death in disguise. Behind the dazzling performances, Liberace's life was like a tragic symphony where the stage lights served only to mask layers of lies. From a poor immigrant boy, he transformed his innate talent into a one-of-a-kind brand. Liberace didn't simply play the piano, he performed a persona. With his glittering, bejeweled cape, slicked back hair, and a candelabra perched on his piano, he became Mr. Showmanship. The brighter his fame burned, the more extreme he became in hiding his sexuality. For decades, Liberace fiercely denied all speculation. When the Daily Mirror hinted he was gay, he took the paper to court and even swore on the Bible, "I am not a homosexual, and I have never engaged in homosexual acts." But behind the curtains, Liberace lived like a hidden emperor. He had a 5-year relationship with Scott Thorson, described publicly as his chauffeur, but the affair ended in chaos. In 1982, Thorson sued him for a massive sum of money, revealing shocking details, including claims that Liberace pressured him into plastic surgery to look like a younger version of himself. By the mid-1980s, as the AIDS epidemic raged, Liberace's health visibly declined. He grew gaunt and frail, covering his withered face under unusually thick makeup. On February 4, 1987, just 3 months after his final performance, Liberace died. At first, the official cause of death was listed as heart failure and encephalopathy, with no mention of AIDS. But an autopsy revealed the shocking truth: Liberace had died of pneumonia resulting from AIDS-related complications. Liberace's death tore away the veil of secrecy, exposing a painful reality. And soon after, another genius, though he had gifted the world with masterpieces, would also meet his end in silence, hidden beneath the cover of a famous animation studio. 16. Howard Ashman, the lyric genius. Disney kept hidden in the shadows. He was known as the man who gave the Little Mermaid her voice, and the one who gave the Beast a soul. Yet very few people knew that behind those timeless songs was a man who built his legacy while battling AIDS. Born in 1950, Howard Ashman revealed his theatrical talent from a very young age. Partnering with composer Alan Menken, he achieved resounding success with the musical Little Shop of Horrors. By 1986, when Disney handed him the script for The Little Mermaid, Ashman penned legendary songs such as Under the Sea and Part of Your World, helping the film become a phenomenon and ushering in Disney's glorious Renaissance era. But just as he reached the pinnacle of his career, he was dealt a devastating blow: a diagnosis of HIV. At a time when the disease carried heavy stigma, Ashman knew that if the truth came out, everything would collapse. Thus, he chose to keep it a secret. In the final months of his life, he worked from his hospital bed. His close friend Alan Menken even brought a piano into his room so they could continue composing together. The song The Mob Song in Beauty and the Beast, which tells of a fearful mob raging against the beast, now carried a profound metaphor reflecting the very terror faced by those living with AIDS. On March 14, 1991, Howard Ashman drew his last breath. At the end of Beauty and the Beast, Disney dedicated a simple yet deeply moving tribute to him, to our friend Howard, who gave a mermaid her voice and a beast his soul. We will be forever grateful. When Howard Ashman passed away, people also remembered another artistic legend, one who had once defied his past in pursuit of freedom, only to ultimately fall to the same illness. 17. Rudolf Nureyev, the dancer who defected from Russia and his final fall to AIDS. On June 17, 1961, at Le Bourget Airport in Paris, a young Soviet dancer named Rudolf Nureyev stood before a life-altering decision: return to Moscow under the watchful eyes of the KGB agents surrounding him or defect to the West. In that decisive moment, he chose a daring leap, vaulting over a security barrier, seizing freedom, and leaving behind everything in his homeland. Having escaped the grip of the KGB, Rudolf Nureyev entered the Western world and swiftly became a sensation. Together with the legendary Dame Margot Fontaine, he delivered breathtaking performances in productions such as Romeo and Juliet and Swan Lake. Nureyev breathed new life into classical ballet, breaking down gender stereotypes in roles and elevating male dancers to the spotlight of the stage. Beyond the stage lights, however, Nureyev lived like an exile, indulging in lavish parties and romantic affairs with powerful members of high society. By the late 1980s, rumors began to circulate that he had contracted AIDS, and on January 6, 1993, Rudolf Nureyev died at the age of 54. In tribute, the Paris Opera House draped a massive black curtain over its stage. Many believed his death was not the end, but rather his final leap out of this world, just as he had leapt away from the Soviet Union 3 decades earlier. The passing of Rudolf Nureyev brought to mind another star, one who had once shone brightly on stage, yet quietly faded into obscurity as death drew near. 18. Paul Shinar, the death of a theatrical genius, the world forgot. Paul Shinar may not have been a household name to mainstream audiences, but to those who loved the stage, he was a legend. Later transitioning into film, he left a powerful impression with his role as drug lord Alejandro Sosa in Scarface, 1983. That cold, ruthless, yet magnetic character was more than just a performance. It seemed to mirror Shinar himself, a man long accustomed to living a double life. In his private life, Paul Shinar was gay. In the Hollywood of the 1970s and 80s, this was a secret that could not be revealed. He was forced to hide, living in silence to safeguard his career wrapped in a disciplined loneliness. Rumor had it that he shared a 5-year relationship with actor Jeremy Brett, the two living and loving one another in secrecy. At the height of his career, Shinar was diagnosed with HIV. Even so, he continued to work, appearing on stage and giving his all even as his body withered away. No one knew the pain he endured, and no one dared to ask. Then one day, he quietly disappeared. On October 11, 1989, Paul Shinar died at the age of 53 from AIDS-related complications. He did not only die from the illness itself, but from the silence and stigma of an industry that forced him into hiding until there was no longer a chance to be seen. And yet, Paul Shinar was not the only one to die in tragedy. There was also a painter, an artist who had poured emotion into his works, but left this world just as it was beginning to understand the messages he had tried to convey. 19. Keith Haring, the artist who painted figures that knew how to cry and passed away just as the world was beginning to understand him. Keith Haring was not just an artist. He was seen as a burning heart beating among the gray walls of a New York decaying under indifference and prejudice. Born in Pennsylvania in 1958, Keith grew up fascinated by colorful drawings. When he moved to New York, he transformed subway stations and abandoned walls into canvases for his art spaces inhabited by the poor people of color and the gay community. He used white chalk to sketch on advertising panels, turning each train ride into a moving exhibition, bringing art to those who might never set foot in a museum. As the world began to notice his name, Keith did not retreat. He used his art to confront the most pressing issues of his time: racism, gender discrimination, and, above all, the deadly silence surrounding the AIDS epidemic. In 1987, when he was diagnosed HIV positive, his works grew sharper and more haunting, overlapping forms, fractured lines, hollow shapes blazing red as warnings of death drawing near. but Keith refused to surrender. He founded the Keith Haring Foundation to support people living with HIV/AIDS. While the U.S. government remained indifferent, he stepped forward with courage, using his own fading body to ignite a message for humanity. On February 16, 1990, Keith Haring breathed his last at the age of 31. He left too soon, yet his vibrant creations still live on, dancing across the walls of hospitals, schools, and in the memories of those who once saw them. Keith's death was a devastating loss, but it also paved the way for greater understanding. And then another actor, though less celebrated, became one of the first in Hollywood to bravely go public with the disease the world still feared. 20. Steven Stucker, the first actor to openly declare he had AIDS. Steven Stucker, a name that could make an entire theater burst into laughter with just a glance carried within him, a story of life so tragic it could chill the soul. Born in 1947 in Des Moines, Iowa, Stucker revealed his natural gift for comedy at an early age. He didn't just act, he set fire to the screen with boundless energy and an eccentric style of improvisation in the Airplane films, turning every scene he appeared in into a moment that audiences could not look away from. Yet, behind the laughter lay a dark secret. In 1984, at the height of his career, Stucker received an invisible death sentence. He tested HIV positive. At that time, AIDS meant overwhelming fear, social stigma, and inevitable death. But instead of keeping silent to protect his reputation, he chose to face it head-on, becoming one of the first actors to publicly acknowledge having AIDS. His familiar comic face became a direct challenge to a disease that society was desperately trying to shun. In interviews, Stucker candidly admitted to his past drug use and acknowledged that drugs might have been the cause of his infection. But time was not on his side. Only 2 years later, in 1986, at the age of 38, Steven Stucker passed away, leaving behind an irreplaceable void in the world of comedy and a legacy of rare courage in Hollywood's history.